ground! I said get on the ground now!
What is my offense, officer?
You are resisting!
I am not resisting.
Don't move! You walk in here with all those medals like I'm supposed to bow down!
He paused. People could die. Arthur felt a cold sensation run down her spine. 10 seconds later, the 3 men in suits entered the terminal. They moved with the quiet precision of people used to stepping into chaotic situations. The first man approached Arthur directly. He didn't show a badge immediately. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Sergeant Arthur?" Arthur nodded. Yes. He handed her a credential. Arthur looked down. Her eyes widened slightly. Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS. She handed the credential back slowly. "You got here fast." The man's expression remained neutral. When the call reached the right desk, speed became important. Behind him, the other 2 agents were already scanning the scene. One of them walked toward Bernard. "Senior Chief Donald." Bernard nodded. "Agent." The agent glanced briefly at the reopened bandage on Bernard's hand. "Are you able to continue standing?" "Yes." "Good." The agent looked around the concourse. Phones, crowds, whispers. Then he looked back at Arthur. "We need to secure this area." Arthur nodded immediately. "Understood." She turned toward the nearby officers. "Clear the concourse around this section." Nathan stepped forward quickly.
"Everyone please step back." Travelers reluctantly moved away, though many kept their phones raised. Within minutes, the immediate area around the scene was partially cleared, but the tension remained, because now everyone knew something unusual was happening. Very unusual. Agent Thomas Reed, the senior NCIS officer present, turned back toward Bernard. "Senior Chief, we need to verify something immediately." Bernard nodded. "The document count." "Yes." Bernard handed the pouch to him. Reed opened it carefully. He removed the stack of papers. Then he began counting, slowly. 1, 2, 3. The surrounding officers watched silently. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. Reed reached the end of the stack. He counted again. Then he looked up. 31. Arthur exhaled slowly. "So I was right." Reed looked directly at Bernard. "Which page?" Bernard answered immediately. "Page 17. Reed's eyes narrowed slightly. "What information does it contain?" Bernard hesitated for the first time. Then he said quietly, "Extraction routes." Arthur frowned. "Extraction routes for what?" Bernard looked at her. "For people." Across the concourse, Derek Jessia stood with his arms folded. He had not spoken since the agents arrived, but his expression was shifting, because he was starting to realize something. This situation was moving beyond his control, way beyond. He stepped forward. "This is ridiculous." Agent Reed turned toward him slowly. "You are Officer Jessia?" "Yes." Reed nodded once. "You will remain here." Jessia opened his mouth again, then stopped, because something else had just happened. The live stream viewer count had crossed 40,000. Clips of the incident were already spreading across social media. One video clearly showed the moment Bernard had been slammed onto the floor. Another showed the scattered classified documents, and someone had zoomed in on the markings. Within minutes, the video began circulating far beyond the airport, across military forums, across news feeds, across offices in Washington where people paid attention to those markings. Inside the terminal, Agent Reed looked back toward Arthur. "I need the exact timeline of events." Arthur nodded.
She began explaining. "When I arrived, Officer Jessia had the subject on the ground." Reed interrupted. "The subject?" Arthur corrected herself. "Senior Chief Donald." She continued. "The document pouch had already opened and the pages were scattered." Reed looked down at the floor briefly, then at the surrounding cameras. Anyone could have picked one up. Arthur nodded. That's what worries me. Nathan suddenly spoke. There was a moment. Everyone looked at him. What moment? Reed asked. Nathan swallowed. When the pages first fell, he pointed slightly toward the seating area. Someone bent down near that row of chairs. Arthur frowned. You didn't mention that earlier. Nathan looked uncertain. I wasn't sure. Reed's voice sharpened. Describe the person. Nathan thought carefully. I couldn't see their face clearly. Uniform? No. Traveler? I think so. Reed turned toward the other agents. We need every camera angle covering this concourse. One agent nodded, already pulling footage. Bernard remained silent throughout the exchange, but inside his mind calculations were already forming. If page 17 had left the scene, it meant someone now possessed information that was never meant to exist outside controlled channels. Extraction routes, safe locations, names, all tied to a network that depended entirely on secrecy. He spoke quietly. That page must be recovered immediately. Reed nodded. We're working on it. Bernard's gaze moved toward the crowd. Because if the wrong person finds it first, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. 20 minutes later, the first call reached the Pentagon. 30 minutes later, a classified alert was issued. 40 minutes later, someone inside the Department of Defense asked a question that made the entire investigation suddenly more urgent. Who has page 17? Back in the airport terminal, Agent Reed turned toward Jessia again. Agent Jessia? Jessia stepped forward reluctantly. Yes? Reed spoke calmly. I need you to describe exactly why you detained Senior Chief Donald. Jessia shrugged. His credentials looked fake. Reed held up the military ID. These? Jessia hesitated. They looked suspicious. Reed stared at him for a long moment. Then he asked one quiet question. Have you ever detained a Navy Special Operations officer before? Jessia didn't answer. Behind them, the young woman still live streaming whispered again to her audience. Guys, federal agents are here now. Her camera zoomed toward Bernard. Whatever this is, her voice trembled slightly. It's getting bigger. And she was right, because somewhere inside that terminal, someone had walked away with a single page, and that page was worth more than anyone watching could imagine. By the time the clock above gate C-19 changed to 6:28 p.m., the airport no longer felt like an airport. It felt like a scene waiting for something bigger to happen. The usual rhythm of movement had slowed. Passengers still walked, but not with purpose anymore. They walked with hesitation, eyes drifting back toward the section of the concourse now partially sealed off. Phones still raised, whispers spreading faster than official information ever could. And at the center of it all stood a single question that no one had yet answered. Where was page 17? Inside the restricted area, Agent Thomas Reed stood with his arms folded, watching as two NCIS analysts connected a secured tablet to the airport's surveillance system. Dozens of camera feeds began populating the screen. Concourse angles, overhead views, entry points, blind spots. Every angle mattered now, because somewhere within these recordings was a moment that lasted less than 3 seconds, a moment that would explain everything, or make things worse. Start with the primary angle, Reed said. The analyst nodded. Footage began playing on the screen. The moment Bernard hit the ground, the pouch sliding across the tile, the pages scattering, phones lifting, a crowd forming. Reed watched without blinking. He had seen incidents like this before, but never one with the stakes like this. Never one where a single missing document could compromise something far beyond the scene itself. "Pause," he said. The footage froze. The scattered pages were visible across the floor, some near Bernard, some near the chairs, some just within reach of the growing crowd. Zoom on that section. The analyst enhanced the image. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was enough to see movement. Feet, shoes, people stepping closer. Reed leaned slightly forward. "Run it again, slower." The footage resumed, frame by frame, and then, "Stop." The analyst paused. Reed pointed at the screen. There, at the edge of the frame, near the row of chairs, a figure moved.
Not quickly, not aggressively, but deliberately. The person bent down slightly. One hand reached toward the floor. Then the figure stood up again, adjusted something at their side, and walked out of the camera's view. The entire movement lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. Reed's voice dropped. "Enhance that." The analyst worked quickly. The image sharpened slightly, but not enough to show a face. Still, there were details: height, build, clothing, a dark jacket, clean posture, measured movement. Reed turned toward Arthur. "Was that one of your officers?" Arthur shook her head immediately. "No." Reed turned toward Nathan. "You saw someone bend down." Nathan nodded. "That's the moment." Reed looked back at the screen. "Then that's our person." Across the terminal, Bernard Donald stood quietly near the secured area. His gaze remained steady, but his thoughts were moving quickly, because he understood something that most people in that terminal did not. That movement on the screen was not random. That was not someone curious, not someone confused. That was someone who recognized exactly what they were looking at and knew exactly what to do with it. Reed turned back toward his team. "I want every camera angle that covers this person's path." The analyst nodded, pulling adjacent feeds now. More screens appeared, different angles, different perspectives, seconds of footage stitched together. The figure reappeared, walking calmly through the concourse, blending into the crowd, never rushing, never looking back. That alone told Reed something important. This person wasn't panicking, which meant one thing: they knew what they had just taken. Arthur crossed her arms. "That doesn't look like a random traveler." Reed nodded. "No, it doesn't." Nathan leaned closer to the screen. "Can you track where they went?" The analyst clicked through another feed, trying. The figure appeared again, near a column, then disappeared behind a group of passengers. Then, another angle, exit corridor, the figure walking toward the service hallway. Reed's expression changed. Pause. The footage froze. Zoom in. The analyst enhanced the image. Still no face, but one detail became clearer.
Badge, clipped to the belt. Not a police badge. Something else. Arthur frowned. "That's not one of ours." Reed nodded slowly. "No." He stepped back slightly. "That's someone who knew exactly where to go." A silence settled over the group, because that detail changed everything. This was no longer a mistake, no longer an accident. This was intentional. Nathan felt his throat tighten. "You're saying—" Reed didn't let him finish. "Yes." He looked back at the screen. That page was taken on purpose. Across the terminal, the live stream numbers continued climbing. 50,000, 70,000. Clips had already begun circulating beyond social media. Local news stations picked it up, then national outlets. The headline forming quickly. Navy SEAL detained at Atlanta airport. Federal agents respond. But the truth behind that headline was still unfolding, and it was far more complicated than anyone watching could see. Back inside the secured area, Arthur spoke quietly. "What exactly is on that page?" Reed glanced toward Bernard. "Senior Chief?" Bernard stepped forward. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked at the screen, at the frozen image of the figure bending down. Then he spoke. "Page 17 contains partial extraction routes." Arthur frowned. "Extraction routes for what?" Bernard answered calmly. "For individuals." Arthur's expression tightened. "What kind of individuals?" Bernard met her gaze. "The kind that cannot be exposed." The meaning settled heavily in the room. Reed exhaled slowly. "If that page reaches the wrong hands—" Bernard finished the sentence. "Those people are no longer safe." Another silence, this one heavier, because now the situation had escalated beyond a single incident, beyond misconduct, beyond internal investigation. This was now a matter of national security. Reed turned back toward his team. "I want identification on that individual." The analyst nodded, working on facial recognition from other angles. Reed shook his head slightly. They avoided cameras too well. Arthur crossed her arms. "Then how do we find them?" Reed's voice remained calm.
We don't find them." He paused. "They make a move." Nathan looked confused. "What do you mean?" Reed turned toward him. "If they took that page intentionally," he gestured toward the screen, "they didn't take it to keep it." He let that sink in. They took it to use it. Bernard's expression didn't change, but inside, he already understood where this was heading, because there was only one reason someone would risk taking classified material from a public scene: value. And value meant one thing: there would be contact. Soon. Reed turned toward Arthur. "We lock this place down." Arthur nodded. "Already in motion." Reed continued. "No one leaves this terminal without being screened." Nathan looked around. "That's thousands of people." Reed nodded once. "Then we start with the ones who aren't supposed to be here." Across the concourse, Derek Jessia stood alone now. No one speaking to him, no one standing near him. For the first time since the incident began, he felt something he hadn't expected: uncertainty. Because everything that had happened since the takedown was no longer about him, and that realization was beginning to settle in. Back at the screen, the analyst spoke again. "I've got something." Reed turned. "What is it?" The analyst zoomed in to another angle. The figure again, this time closer, still partially obscured, but clearer. Reed leaned in. "Enhance the wrist." The image sharpened slightly. A watch, distinct, high-end. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "That's not something most travelers wear." Reed nodded. "No." He stepped back. "That's someone who planned this." Nathan felt a chill run through him, because the deeper the investigation went, the clearer something became. This wasn't random. This wasn't chaos. This was a chain reaction, and it had started with 11 seconds. Reed turned back toward Bernard. "Senior Chief?" Bernard looked at him. "Yes?" Reed asked quietly. "Who would want that information?" Bernard didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't one person. It wasn't a group. It was anyone who understood its value. Finally, he said, "People who know what it's worth." Reed nodded slowly. "Then we're not just looking for someone who took a page." He looked back at the screen.
We're looking for someone who knew exactly what they were taking. And somewhere beyond the walls of the airport, that person was already moving. By 7:02 p.m., the atmosphere inside Concourse C had changed again. Not calmer, not louder, but heavier. The kind of weight that settles over a place when the situation has gone beyond explanation. Airport announcements still played overhead, flights still boarded, passengers still moved, but every movement now felt disconnected from the reality unfolding just a few yards away. Because behind a partially sealed section of the terminal, a federal investigation was accelerating faster than anyone expected, and no one outside that circle yet understood why. Inside the restricted area, Agent Thomas Reed stood in front of the surveillance monitor, arms crossed, eyes fixed. The footage looped again, the same moment, the same figure, the same 2-second movement that had changed everything. The bend, the reach, the exit. Reed didn't look frustrated, he looked focused, which to anyone who knew his reputation was worse, because frustration meant uncertainty, focus meant direction, and right now he was starting to see one. "Run the exit corridor again," Reed said. The analyst obeyed immediately. The screen shifted. The figure appeared again, walking through the service corridor. No hesitation, no rush, then gone. Reed spoke quietly. "That's not someone reacting." Arthur stood beside him. "What does that mean?" Reed didn't look away from the screen. "That means they knew exactly what they were looking for." Nathan Edward felt a tightness in his chest because every new piece of information made one thing clearer. This wasn't just about the officer anymore. This wasn't just about the arrest. Something else had intersected with that moment, something that had nothing to do with routine policing and everything to do with timing. Behind them, Bernard Donald stood silent, watching, listening, calculating. He had seen operations fall apart before, not because of mistakes, but because of timing. And this felt like timing. Too precise to be coincidence, too clean to be accidental. Reed turned away from the screen, locked down all service corridors. Arthur nodded immediately. Already started. Reed continued. "I want every maintenance exit monitored." Nathan spoke quietly. "Even if they've already left?" Reed looked at him. "They haven't." Nathan frowned. "How do you know?" Reed's answer came without hesitation. "Because if they took that page for what I think they took it for," he paused, "they're not done yet." That sentence lingered in the air. Not done yet. Across the concourse, the live stream had crossed 100,000 viewers. Clips were now trending across multiple platforms. A news station banner flashed on a nearby TV screen. Breaking: Federal agents respond to airport incident involving Navy personnel. People gathered beneath it, watching, speculating, guessing, but none of them understood what was actually happening, not yet.
Inside the restricted zone, one of the NCIS analysts suddenly spoke. "Agent Reed." Reed turned. "What is it?" The analyst hesitated, then said, "You need to hear this." The room shifted, not physically, but in attention, because something in the analyst's tone had changed. "What did you find?" Reed asked. The analyst turned the tablet slightly. "It's not from the cameras." Reed stepped closer. "Then what is it?" The analyst swallowed. "It's a call." Arthur frowned. "A call from where?" The analyst looked up. "From inside the airport." Silence. Reed's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "When?" 6 minutes ago." Arthur stepped forward. "Who made it?" The analyst shook his head. "We don't have a name yet." Reed's voice lowered. "Play it." The audio began, static at first, then a voice, low, controlled, male. "I have it." The room went still. The voice continued. 17. A pause. Then, "Yes, confirmed." Another pause. "Price just doubled." Arthur felt her stomach drop. Reed didn't move. The recording continued. 10 minutes. The call ended. No one spoke, because everyone in that room understood what they had just heard. Nathan broke the silence. That's the page." Arthur nodded slowly. "Yes." Reed finally spoke. "They didn't just take it." He looked around the room. "They're selling it." The shift was immediate. What had been a recovery operation had just become a race. "Trace the call," Reed said sharply. The analyst was already working on it. Arthur turned toward the corridor. "We need to shut down exits." Reed shook his head. "No." Arthur looked at him.
No? Reed's voice remained calm. "If we shut everything down now," he pointed toward the tablet, "we spook them." Arthur understood immediately. "They disappear." Reed nodded. "And we lose the page." Nathan felt his pulse spike. "So what do we do?" Reed turned toward him. "We let them move." That answer hit differently, because it meant one thing. They weren't stopping the suspect. They were watching them. Bernard finally spoke. "Where is the call coming from?" The analyst looked up, still triangulating. Bernard stepped closer. "Time matters." Reed nodded. "I know." The analyst tapped the screen rapidly. Coordinates began forming, signals bouncing between internal towers, tracking movement. Then, "I have it." Everyone leaned in. "Service Corridor B." Arthur turned immediately. "That's 2 levels below us." Reed nodded. "Maintenance access." Nathan whispered. "That's how they avoided cameras." Reed grabbed his radio. "Units move to Corridor B." Arthur stepped forward. "I'll take point." Reed stopped her with a hand. "No." Arthur frowned. "No?" Reed's voice was steady. "This isn't your scene anymore." Arthur held his gaze. "For now, it is." A brief pause. Then Reed nodded once. "Fine." Within seconds, movement began. Officers repositioned. Agents moved. The quiet tension exploded into controlled action. Down in Service Corridor B, the air felt different. Cooler, darker, less crowded. The hum of machinery replaced the noise of the terminal. And somewhere in that corridor, a person was moving with purpose. Back upstairs, the live stream continued. Now over 200,000 viewers. Comments flooded in. "Why are there so many agents? This is bigger than we thought. Something's wrong." They were right. but not for the reasons they thought. Down in the corridor, footsteps echoed. Arthur moved first, 2 agents behind her, Reed just behind them, Nathan trailing slightly. Every movement controlled, every sound amplified by the narrow walls. Arthur raised a hand. They stopped. Footsteps ahead. Faint, but there. Reed whispered, "Slow." The team moved forward again, step by step, closer, closer. Then, a shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Arthur's voice cut through the silence. "Stop!" The shadow froze for half a second, then turned and ran. "Go!" Reed shouted. Footsteps exploded through the corridor.
The chase had begun. The figure moved fast, not panicked, focused, turning corners without hesitation, as if they already knew the layout. Arthur pushed forward. "Cut him off!" Reed's voice came through. "He's heading for the lower exit." The figure reached a junction, turned sharply, vanished. Arthur reached the corner seconds later. Stopped, looked left, looked right. Nothing. Reed arrived behind her. "Where is he?" Arthur shook her head. "He's gone." Silence returned. Heavy, uncomfortable, because this wasn't supposed to happen. Nathan arrived last, breathing hard. "He just disappeared?" Arthur nodded slowly. "Yes." Reed stepped forward, examining the area. Then he saw it. A door, slightly open. He pushed it wider. Inside, empty, but not untouched. A phone sat on the ground, screen still lit. Reed stepped closer, picked it up, looked at the screen. Then his expression changed. Arthur stepped beside him. "What is it?" Reed turned the phone toward her. On the screen, a message, just one line. Location changed. Arthur felt the weight of that immediately. They knew we were coming. Reed nodded. "Yes." Nathan looked between them. Then this wasn't just someone stealing a page. Reed finished the thought. No. He looked back toward the corridor. This was planned. Upstairs, the live stream continued. Now nearing 300,000 viewers. The world was watching. But they were watching the wrong part of the story. Because the real story had just moved somewhere else. And wherever it had moved, the page was still out there.